Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. The time is now 10:30, so we're going to begin our meeting. This meeting is now open to the public, and we have started recording.
Okay. Thanks very much, Melik. And want to welcome everyone to the meeting. One second here. So I want to welcome you to Colorado's Advisory Board Work Group meeting. Thanks everyone to join us. I'm Scott Cassell. I'm CEO and founder of the Product Stewardship Institute and the facilitator for the Advisory Board. Today, as I said, is a work group meeting during which we will be discussing the program plan proposal submitted by CAA. As a reminder, each statutory subtopic review will be led by a different advisory board member, and PSI will be facilitating. Our agenda today is as follows: presentations first by Citeo, Green Blue, and CAA on the free allocation methodology. We are then going to go into the program plan carryover topic from work group 6, which are on targets, PCR, and the opportunity to purchase requirements. That's section 705-4R, and that is one subtopic that we're going to go over, that one thing. We're then going to go to carryover topics for work group 7, and they will be on service provider collaboration, infrastructure, reuse and refill, impacts, and market development. And there's 4 subtopics to go through. So the goal of today's meeting is for the work group leads to discuss their review of the sections in the plan and determine whether the statutory requirements have been met or partially met or not met. If it's partially met, then we're going to be looking at any amendments that they recommend. We will also be looking at any comments or recommendations that they have as well, even if it is met. We will pause at the end of each discussion to allow for public comment. Now, we are not taking a roll call since we have a work group meeting. So we're going to be taking attendance in the background. So those who are on the board, please put your name in affiliation into the chat. So before we begin, I'd like to turn the mic over to our advisory board coordinator, Melik Gorton, of the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment for some logistics on our in-person meeting on April 2nd. Melik?
Thanks, Scott. Melik Gorton, CDPHE. As all of you know, we have our in-person board meeting coming up on Wednesday, April 2nd. For board members, please be on the lookout for an email about when and how to arrive. Read those instructions carefully. We will be providing coffee and pastries, lunch, and breakfast for the board, but if you require more than a light breakfast, please eat prior to your arrival. For members of the public, there will be 2 different ways to attend. One will be like any other advisory board meeting. There will be a virtual option, and you will register for the work group meeting as you would normally do through our webpage. If you have already registered for the work group meetings, there are no other steps you need to take. The second option is to attend in person. There's limited space within the meeting room, so as such, it will be first come, first served basis. So we will send out, so we have already sent out an email with an interest form to attend in person. And I will also have Brandon place that interest form in the chat if you would like to attend. And if you are selected to attend, you will receive an email by Monday, March 31st with arrival instructions. We're looking forward to seeing you there in person. So back to you, Scott.
All right, thank you, Melik. Appreciate that. And so we're going to be starting up these presentations, but I wanted to try to set the stage here. And Wolf and Melik here, we didn't have a full chance to talk about this, but I think we're on the same page. So we wanted to start the discussion on work group 6, the PCR content, by ensuring that we're all on the same page regarding the questions that we want to answer and the feedback requested. We have 90 minutes for this particular session to attempt to reach a general consensus on 7054R. And since there is no voting on the workgroup meetings, we're going to be doing a straw poll, which is an informal way to understand whether we have a general consensus, meaning all in agreement, or something less than that. First, we are, as usual, seeking to determine if advisory board members believe that CAA has met the statutory requirement on this topic. And so, Liz, I don't know if you'd like to read that statute or if you'd like me to.
I am still finding it in the document. Sorry, Liz Chapman, Recycle Colorado. So if you wanted to go ahead and read it, Scott, that would save us some time.
All right, thank you. So 7054R, describe how the organization will verify minimum post-consumer recycled content rates and how post-consumer recycled content rates will be calculated using weight and other metrics. And describe any waivers from minimum post-consumer recycled content rates granted to a type or subcategory of covered materials and the criteria for evaluating such waivers, including food safety requirements, technological feasibility, or inadequate supply, and how often the waivers will be reviewed. Now, we have had some discussion on this already, but to ensure, so there's a request here to put this on the screen. So if I think we'll get to that in a second. To ensure that the PRO plan meets this requirement, the AB wants to better understand the method proposed by CAA of using mass balance with what is called free allocation to verify that no fuel will be counted as post-consumer recycled content. CAA has invited some guest speakers to provide additional information about this method. So I want to focus this discussion as much as we can on the questions that we're trying to answer. So for the first 30 minutes, we're going to hear presentations from Citeo and Green Blue. We will wait to take questions until the end of both presentations. So if you have some questions, jot them down on a piece of paper right next to you, because we're not going to stop during the presentation. We want to get through them. That's the first 30 minutes. The next 30 minutes will be a discussion. And the last 30 minutes, we're going to seek to move towards that general consensus. And we'll take a straw poll at the end to see where all of you are at. So I want you all to keep in mind, and Melik perhaps, or Brandon, don't know who it is, can maybe put the questions to consider so it's upfront in mind. So question 1, did CAA meet the statutory requirement? If they didn't, do you have an amendment request? And what specifically is that request? And I know Amanda's been working hard to try to get with you to try to narrow this down so there's clarity over what you want and so others can respond. Question 3 is, if the answer is yes, they have met the statutory requirement, then do you suggest any additional recommendations? And I think they're labeled as comments, really the same thing, recommendations in the review template. So those are the questions to keep in mind. And with that, we're going to go to Pierre Benavides of Circular Action Alliance, who will be joined by colleagues from Citeo and Green Blue for a presentation on credit allocation options for the mass balance credit chain of custody method and the related ISO standards. So with that, over to you, Pierre.
Scott, Pierre's not on. He's actually on an airplane right now, but I'm just waiting for CTO and Green Blue to come on. And I don't think I have either one of them that's come on. So I'm wondering, I've just sent them an email to see if there's an issue with them logging in.
Okay.
And I just resent all their panels links.
Okay.
So they should have them.
My apologies.
Gail?
Thank you. Gail, Gary, City of Steamboat Springs City Council. Maybe while we're waiting, could you explain, what CTO and Green Blue,
Yeah.
the background of those two organizations?
Yeah. No problem. So Gail, so CTO has come and presented to us before. They are the French Producer Responsibility Organization. So they have been operating for a number of years already. They do already have post-consumer recycled content requirements that are in place in France. Their program is, and you'll see as they present, their program is slightly different than ours. It's got a bit of a different set of materials that are included, but they specifically require targets around plastics, post-consumer recycled content targets. And so we thought that it would be helpful to have them to talk about it from a pro that is operating and that is looking to address some of the challenges related to addressing post-consumer recycled content, how they're dealing with verification, how they're as well dealing with some of the issues that this group has talked around exempting fuel. So we thought it was a practical way for an actual example to be used. Laura from Green Blue has been involved in standard setting here in the United States. She has been a part of ISO working groups and has been working specifically around the development of a content requirement. So she can speak to not only plastics, but she can speak as well to how the recycled material standard is being put into place into the United States and how potentially it would look at addressing issues related to fuel. So we thought we would provide the sort of international context around what's something that's actually in place, and then more talk about at home here as that work that could be leveraged in the United States specifically.
Thank you.
So Pete, here's a suggestion. If they're not available now, will they be available later? Maybe we'll go to work group 7 and kind of switch this up.
If we can, I apologize. I both had confirmed, and I have emailed both, and I'm waiting to hear back from them. So,
Okay, they won't be the first to be messed up by the airlines. All right, so if that if that works for you, Pete, then I would suggest that we move to section the work group 7. So let me move down myself to that. And I wasn't prepared for this either, but neither have anybody. So let's go through. There we go. All right.
Is it U4?
So as I said, we have 4 subsections. Thank you for putting that up there. And you can see which number that is. It's 7054 U4. And what page number is that? 59 there. So we want to go to that, and here's where Caroline, you are the work group lead. So if you could read the statute, and then which box is checked, and then if you can start summarizing what the comments are and moving down that list. Thank you.
Caroline Mitchell, City of Fort Collins, also reorienting to shifting here. So this is a requirement that we started discussing at the last meeting, but I will start us from scratch again. The requirement is 705 for you. Describe how the organization will work with service providers to you for propose an approach to measure and report on the use of reusable and refillable covered materials and establish goals and strategies for increasing the use of reusable and refillable covered materials. We have selected partially met for this requirement. There are a number of notes of where in the text this is referenced. The draft amendment request at the moment is to please clarify which measurement approaches and metrics CAA plans to use for reuse and refill, and a timeline in which CAA will establish specific goals beyond the year-over-year increase target. We have, and then we just have some additional comments with additional clarity on some of those, including suggestions to align with other states who have this in their EPR requirements. And we do know that CAA is working towards harmonization across all of the state requirements anyhow, but just as a reference point, and Scott shared a recommendation that perhaps it would be helpful to include in the system a requirement for producers to identify opportunities to switch to reuse and refill as part of their regular reporting. And would welcome additional comments, questions, conversation.
Okay, thanks. So just before, let me say that we timed all of this out, and thanks to Wolf and Melik and Amanda for this. So we're going to have like basically 15 minutes, 16 maybe, for each of these 4 topics. So we're going to be going to, around 11:05, excuse me, 11:05, I believe. So that's where we're headed. So let's try to get this, focus on here, and this is partially met, and there are some amendments. And I'm going to ask Amanda if you have anything else to add, because I know Amanda's been working with some of you as well to try to focus any of these comments. Amanda, anything you'd like to add?
No, I'll just, for clarity, on the last call when we touched on this subject, we had already established the amendment request that's in there. So now we are just looking to finalize this second draft amendment request here on this call and confirm the comments in case anyone was confused by the draft amendment versus the existing amendment request.
Great, thank you. And Scott DeFife is not here. I don't see him. So this is his request, I believe, as Caroline mentioned. So we're going to see if this is accepted, or there's questions about it. Over to you, Brian.
Brian Loma, Green Latinos. I apologize that I did not get to put as much time into refill, reuse, and some additional comments. But I'm getting a question about the fee structure being adjusted, possibly for those who have exempt reusables. Did we get a chance to look at the upstream recommendations as far as they would apply to this section?
So Brian, are you asking about something else besides this amendment request?
No, well, yeah,
Does it relate to it?
Yes, there were some
Okay.
recommendations by Upstream. I believe I made a comment in another section and last week or 2 weeks ago said, hey, you know, there's some public comments in this section. So I think that part of this section specifically was about their comments indicated regarding the incentives for voluntary reporting. And I just want to know.
Sorry, Brian. Can I just ask, and I'm sorry to interject because I want to make sure I understand. This is, we're now focused on one amendment request. There can be others. So this one, I want to make sure that we get a comment on others on this one, and then you'll have an opportunity to add anything else after.
I apologize. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So, you know, Scott's is not here, but are there any questions about this specific amendment request? At this point, I don't know, Pete, if you have any comments or questions about this one. I know he's not here right now. And as far as, so I'm going to ask the advisory board in general, if you're comfortable with this, because this is going to be a general consensus, right? This is not just Scott DeFife's comment. This is the advisory board's comments and requests going to CAA. So you've got to own this also. And I want to make sure you're all comfortable with that. So Caroline and then Liz.
Caroline Mitchell, City of Fort Collins. The draft amendment request that's listed here is actually one that I had drafted. So there was a piece that Scott had mentioned in a previous meeting, and it kind of got lumped into this one. And I think in our conversation in our last meeting, that was pulled apart and is reflected in the additional comments down below. So at least that's my recollection of the content and sort of the drafter of the content. I believe, so the draft amendment that I had initially added in was to clarify which measurement approaches CAA plans to use, as well as establishing that specific goal. I believe the amendment request, as stated, helps clarify where the language is vague in the current program plan about the goal. And it talks about a couple of different measurements, but I think this is one of those that's like a small refinement. It's just, it doesn't actually say this is how we will measure. It kind of talks about how the measurements are difficult and the lack of information, and it talks about, but it doesn't actually say like, this is exactly how we'll measure it. So I don't know that this is a monumental ask, but I do feel like, at least from my reading of it, which metrics they're proposing using are not clear in the text. And I would be okay with that being either an additional comment or an amendment request, because I feel like it's sort of in the gray area for meeting the requirement or not. And if board members have a strong opinion about which place that makes sense or additional feedback, that's context I have on the remaining draft amendment request.
All right, thanks. I'm trying to pay attention to a few things at once because I know Siteo has joined us here, but Green Blue had a family emergency and won't be able to join us. So, Gautier, I appreciate you joining us here. And I'd like to finish this particular section here if we can, and then we'll move to the presentations and go back up to the agenda. So Caroline, so is the way that this was changed here, this amendment request, or edited by Amanda, is that work for you?
Maybe I'll pause and see if Liz and Gail's comments would like to add in. I deleted the text. I know it's so detailed here. The draft amendment request essentially had two elements to it. I just deleted the part that's addressed in the official amendment request section.
Oh,
so.
Okay, and is the other one also an amendment request as well, the one above it?
I believe so, but I would also welcome other board members' feedback if it's a about whether it's an amendment request or additional comment.
Thank you so much. Okay, thanks for being patient, Liz, and then Gail.
Liz Chapman, Recycle Colorado. Caroline addressed one of the things that I was wanting to say in my comment, which is I feel that the current amendment request is covered. And so she addressed my first concern. The second question about clarifying which measurement approaches or which metrics CAA is going to deploy to determine goals and progress towards goals, I feel that should be moved to an amendment request, because as I read the legislative requirement, it says propose an approach to measure and report. And currently the plan is very vague. So I think that that draft amendment request should be elevated to an official amendment request to get clarification in the plan about the specific measurement or metrics CAA is going to look at on this particular reuse refill. But as Caroline said, we're here to discuss it. So I'm certainly open if someone sees it differently.
Thank you, Liz. Gail.
Gail Gary, Steamboat Springs City Council. I will just, I guess, echo and underscore what Liz just said. As usual, I think she's done a great job of summarizing. And I think, as we say, if we look at that language, it does specifically say propose an approach. So I would support the additional amendment request.
Okay, so
I'll third
Amanda,
that motion.
whoops. Brian, say that again.
Sorry, Brian Loma Green Latinos. I will third that as an additional comment. I think that's great. As an additional motion.
Okay, thank you. Pete.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, happy if the board wants to recommend this. I would say this is a very tricky new area to potentially measure. Reuse and refill aren't necessarily well established in any of the states right now. I think it is a growing concern for CAA to make sure that we can meet the requirements. Refill happens in lots of different ways in the economy, and everything from drinking fountains to people bringing in travel mugs to people having access to stations that will allow you to refill your window. So I just mentioned it that it is difficult. If there's more specifics that the board can offer, that would be helpful for us to try to get something more specific in the program plan.
All right, and when more specifics, anything you want to point to as what more specifics means? Quickly, because I'm trying to bring this into a close. I said 15 minutes for each one of these items, and we're already, almost there. So we're gonna have to do this quick, then take the vote. And Brian, I'm gonna go back to you, but it's got to be quick and on one point here. Pete, anything?
Nope.
Good. Okay, Caroline.
Caroline Mitchell, City of Fort Collins. Thank you for the feedback, Liz and Gail and Brian. And Pete, I feel like I hear what you're saying, and I feel like this is just another one of those topics, kind of like compost, where it's just funky in the legislation, and we're all just going to have to kind of do our best. But also, I think acknowledging in the text that, you've already acknowledged there's lots of a lack of information in this, and it may be a situation where we're going to have to be adjustable to future metrics changing over time and acknowledging that in the text. But I think we still have to sort of pick some things that as we can now. And I do think there are additional organizations that focus more on this topic that could potentially be available for helping develop those metrics with their increased level of specialization. So thank you.
All right, so you're good with that. And Clinton, you put something in the chat. Would it be helpful to add a time frame for measurements expected?
I was just wondering, I went back and reread it as fast as I could.
Can't hear you. Can't hear you. I know he's got background noise there. So Brian, I'm going to go to you. Mandy, you had and or, is that significant here or?
Yeah,
I'm gonna
just a,
assume it's
just
two
a couple
different
of
things.
quick clarifying things. So as the plan currently reads, this first amendment request, CAA Colorado will evaluate the potential, changing it to will establish a benchmark. That happens after baseline data collection happens, so that could be the time frame. So I don't know if time frame is absolutely necessary given what exists in the plan already. But I'm happy to add that. I also just want to ask if these two amendment requests conflict with each other and one should replace the other, or if they should both be there. The first asks CAA Colorado to establish a benchmark metric to be included in the 5-year program update. And the other asks CAA to clarify right now which amendment approaches or metrics CAA plans to use for reuse and refill. One seems to be you have to do it now, and the other one seems to be you have to do it for inclusion in the 5-year program plan. Is there some additional clarity any of the board members would like to bring to this?
Liz?
Liz Chapman, Recycle Colorado. I think given the pioneering nature of this, I think it is appropriate to ask that this change be included in the 5-year program update and not something that is expected to happen today, because it's unrealistic to ask them to establish goals or measurement under something that is clearly not being currently measured. And one of the suggestions that has been made about a metric is there the capacity for producers to report how much single-use packaging has been eliminated as they transition to reusable packaging? Is a question.
Clinton?
Clinton.
Yeah, you guys hear me okay now?
Yes.
Thank you. I think Liz just kind of answered or kind of said what I was trying to get to a little bit is, can we put in a timeline for defining a effective measurement or metric so that we're working towards what we're asking for while we're trying to figure out what we're asking for? And it's similar in the organics. I'm just wondering if that is similar to what you're saying, Liz. Can we kind of find a pathway forward that gets us a resolve that we're looking for without it being lost?
So Liz, I think Liz, what you're saying here is put it into the 5-year program plan update, which means in 5 years, it would be there. It needs to be there. So a requirement would be a commitment and a requirement to be in that 5-year plan by that time. And Liz is saying yes. So Amanda, does that answer your question? And the and/or, we still changing it a little bit here. Okay. All right, Brian.
I'm just seeing a question on the voluntary reporting versus the mandatory reporting as proof of exemption. So is there any incentive?
Where is this an amendment request?
So I think this was part of the second amendment that was being added. Could we put some language in there about having voluntary reporting options as well?
Down here, additional comments. So that's additional comments. So we're on the amendments now. But if you want to address
Right,
that additional comment,
no,
are you saying bring it up?
I kind of read that, and Gail, maybe you can answer this, but was that supposed to be part of the second amendment?
I see. Okay. So Brian's suggesting moving that up into the amendment request as part of the amendment request.
I would just like to chime in. There is a section about reporting in which this is already, like, there are already comments. So I think it's part of a different section of the statute and can be addressed more directly there. I think it would be helpful just to finalize this amendment request and then move to CTO's presentation.
Yep, okay. So you would move this into another
I think that
subtopic?
I think it's fine to leave it there for right now, and there are additional comments in another subsection related to voluntary reporting.
Okay,
Yep.
great, thank you. Caroline, hopefully you're gonna try to wrap us up here so we can move to the CTO presentation. They're 6 hours ahead, or 7 maybe, of us.
Caroline Mitchell, City of Fort Collins. I know we need to wrap this up, and I'm just trying to make sure what I was trying to convey is still sort of clearly conveyed in here. And I feel like there are two pieces to this. I think there is the measurement approach, and then there is the setting the goals and strategies. And I feel like they kind of got blended together here. And I think to me, I feel like even though they may not be the perfect long-term metrics, it feels important to be clear about what metrics CAA is proposing to initially start out measuring. And then with the goal piece that they've proposed, the year-over-year increase of the goal with a, so I think there's two pieces of getting clarity on when an additional goal will be put together, which I feel like makes sense in a 5-year timeline. But I feel like the way this is reading right now is saying there's not even a requirement to establish any sort of a metric for 5 years, which feels like not meeting the requirement. And so I'm happy to work on the sideline to help get the text to say that, if that feels like what other board members feel like we're trying to convey. And I'm not trying to belabor us, but I just want to make sure we're all at least clear on what we're trying to say. And then I'm happy to work with Amanda on the side to make sure we're saying it.
Okay, Liz, you had your hand up before. Did you want to jump in?
Liz Chapman, Recycle Colorado. I am in agreement with what Caroline is saying, that the goals and the targets can be delayed by 5 years while they gather data to set realistic goals. But back to that thing about measuring, I hear what Peter is saying, that because this is new, it is challenging to know what metrics to use. And I am in agreement, and for the sake of time, that board members that have ideas about metrics that might be useful could add those in outside of this meeting. We could add them into the documentation. There have been some public comments submitted that also have ideas about metrics, measurement tools that could be used between now and 5 years. But I think there needs to be a tweak to the language for them to have met what I understand this part of the regulation is stipulating.
Okay. Thank you. So Amanda's written something down here, and before we move on, is this capture the amendment request for this group on this particular topic? So can I get a straw poll from the group? Use your hands here. Those that are good with it, just raise them. No thumbs up. Like, I don't know who it's from. If you can raise your hands, please, that would be great. Again, this is a straw poll, not a vote. So I'm seeing for those that are here, and I'm trying to see who's here and not raising. Okay, so it looks like we do have general consensus among those who are present. Thank you. All right, great. Appreciate that. Thank you, Amanda. And let us move now to the presentation. We're gonna switch gears. And Pete, over to you.
Okay, so I think I provided a bit of an introduction, Gautier, to yourself and a bit of background on CTO. So maybe I will hand things over, but just if I can say, I very much appreciate you being able to join on very short notice today, and certainly know you bring a wealth of experience to this topic as work that CTO has been done and you've been doing to verify recycled content in France.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me well?
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm very sorry for being late. There is a misunderstanding on how we should start, but I'm here and that's what really counts. So I'm an eco-design engineer by CTO, working in the eco-design department. CTO is the producer responsibility organization for domestic packaging, household packaging, and paper in France. We have more or less 80,000 clients. That goes from really small clients paying only 80 euro per year to Danone, Nestlé, L'Oréal, Coca-Cola, big company putting a lot of products and packaging on the market each year. And we have a turnover of more than 1 billion euro. It will be maybe 1.5 billion euro in 2026. So I started with CTO for 6 years now, and there was only 750 million euro at that time. So we almost doubled the contribution in 6 or 7 years. We are a private company, but a non-profit company, and we have a 30 years experience now on this extended producer responsibility. So next slide, please. So I'm here to talk about what we've done in the recent years regarding the way to foster the incorporation of PCR material within plastic packaging. So I will present to you what we've done and what is the system in place regarding the modulation of our fees. So next, please. So if you look at the amount of money we can give back to our customer if they prove they incorporate PCR material in their plastic packaging. So on the column in the middle, you have the normal, I would say, modulation, the normal prime that we give back to our client if they can prove that they are incorporated a certain amount of recycled plastic within the plastic packaging. So we have different ways to prove it, and I will come back to this afterwards. But what is important here is to notice that we have different amounts depending on, I would say, the maturity of the incorporation of material. Especially for PET, we have mature decontamination technology for recycling PET, and it's possible we have quite a lot of volumes and quite a big offer of decontaminated recycled PET in Europe, and therefore we decided to have a premium which is quite low. It is only 50 euro per ton of incorporated recycled PET within new packaging. But for other plastic resin, you can see we have much bigger, much larger prime because we know that it's much more difficult because there is no decontamination technology for LDPE, HDPE, PP, or PS. And we know that for secondary packaging, that could be quite tricky also to incorporate such recycled material. So we need much more incentive on these plastic resins. And then we have a specific, I would say, additional premium that will be given to customer what they can prove. For instance, for PET, if the recycled PET comes from the recycling of pot and trays out of PET. It is much more difficult because of the lead, because of the way it is designed. It is much more difficult to recycle a tray out of PET than to recycle a bottle out of PET. So therefore, we gave here 350 euro more if you can prove that the recycled PET comes from a specific recycling line dedicated to the recycling of pot and trays out of PET. And for the LDPE, we make a difference between post-consumer coming from industrial use and post-consumer coming from domestic use. It is much more difficult to recycle and to put back and to incorporate back recycle LDPE that comes from industrial, that come from domestic, because it will be printed, it could be mixed with some PP, mixed with some other materials or some paper or cardboard. And beside that, you have LDPE coming from industrial, which is much more easy to recycle. So you see there is a modulation of the amount that we give back, and that gives a signal also of the difficulty and to also to stress the need of developing such technology. So then how do we verify? How do we audit? So that's the next slide, please. There is actually it is important to notice that we were doing different things before 2024, and for 2024 sales, that's what you have just in front of your eyes. We were just demanding a certification with a third-party verification at a recycler level. So we have a specific standard in Europe. It's called the European Standard 15343, and it's dedicated to the traceability of recycled plastic. So we demand that the certification that will be certified, the plastic recyclers, has to follow this specific standard, and we also demand a third-party verification. So the basic certification for this kind of activity, I would say, is the Recyclas recycling process, which is something that you can find on the internet. And I think even in the US, recycling industry can be audited and can be certified with such certification. And at the converter level, then it was not mature enough to demand a certification at that time. So from until 2024, we were demanding only a self-declaration at the converter level, at the packaging manufacturer level, and for him to commit that he's using recycled material coming from a certified source, a certified sourcing, and then he will commit also on the amount and the percentage of PCR that is putting in the packaging that is sold to the CTO customer. So it was quite light, to be honest, as a proof, and therefore we decided to move to something which is much more binding, I would say, but much more transparent with regard to the traceability. So if we can move to the slide just after. So, whoa, that's not exactly as it was before, but anyway, I will try to describe it. So the difference from 2024 and 2025 is that we demand a certification at converter level. So there are many different certifications at converter level. There is one which is also a Recyclas, but it's not recycling process. It is called use of recycled plastic. But you can be certified at converter level only if your sourcing of PCR is already certified with the EN 15343. So it's like an umbrella certification covering both recyclers and converter. And the idea is to see what is the exact amount of plastic recycling that you put in your packaging. And we can use for this certification different chain of custody. I can't see any presentation. I pretend maybe, but
maybe
yeah.
is someone trying to fix the slides there in the background?
Yeah. Okay, but that's fine. I will go on. I will go on. So regarding the chain of custody that are used, we only rely on control blending if we, and that's, I would say, the most demanding one, if you really want to be sure that each packaging unit that goes out from the converter has a specific amount of recycled plastic in it and post-consumer recycled plastic in it, or we have a more flexible one that is quite usually called the part 1 of Recyclas or part 1 or other certification, and it's more a rolling average mass balance. So you can, more or less the average value of, or the average recycled content within a year, but because the audit period is always 1 year, and you have the recycled content, which will be average during this year. So for the time being, because it's the first year in 2025, we only ask the part 1, which is the rolling average. But we know that regarding the regulation, could be possible that the part 2, that means control blending, will be needed. So we working step by step also with the value chain, because there is not enough maturity regarding certification, because all of this is quite new. So we're trying to grow together with the whole value chain, so recyclers, raw material producer, converter, and also our clients, which are a brand or a distributor, and for them to understand that we need full transparency regarding the incorporation of recycled plastic in plastic packaging. And that goes through third-party verification and specific certification. Then I know that you have a specific question regarding plastic package, recycled plastic coming from chemical recycling technology, and that is relying on mass balance chain of custody. So as I told you, we are using mass balance, but the rolling average, but also we are thinking about using the credit method also. So maybe we can move to the next slide. So how do we assess mass balance, and especially credit method? That is something really important. So for you to really understand, it is not eligible for the timing in our prime. So any recycled PE, recycled PP out of chemical recycling technology and relying on a mass balance credit method, chain of custody, is not eligible to our prime for now, but it will be most probably in 2026. And here I explain, and I think you all know this, what are the difference between the different chain of custody, especially the one which, when we can be sure that the physical reality is the same as the one we claim. So that's the 3 chain of custody that we have here. If you use such a chain of custody, there's an equal sign between the physical presence of recycled plastic within the packaging and the thing that you claim. But if you move to the next slide, then you move to mass balance chain of custody, and you see there is 2 mass balance, one which is rolling average that is used already by the certification for recycled mechanical recycled plastic, if you want to have something which is average during a year, or the credit method, which is widely used now for chemical recycling, especially for polyolefin chemical recycling. And for credit method, for the timing, it's not eligible in our prime, because we need we need some more information regarding the origin of the waste and the waste that are how they are recycled, and if they are recycled in material and not in energy. That's something we need to clarify, because as soon as you put some recycled feedstock within a steam cracker, there are different output, could be material or it could be energy. And that's really the idea of clarifying the rules of assessing the recycled content out of chemical recycling technology. And that's what I am describing afterwards. So the debate we have now in Europe, maybe you can just keep the slide, please. Yes. So if you look at the mass balance credit method, you have on the left-hand side, you can have a circular feedstock that could be biosourced or recycled. That's actually exactly the same concept. And you have also a conventional feedstock. So if you look at what goes out from the steam cracker, there is a bit less than 20% that is self-consumption, a bit less than 2% that are losses, mainly by being coke. And then you have two main outputs. One is the energy output. Again, values are only illustrative, but it's more or less quite the same, the good amount if you look at a quite representative steam cracker. So you have energy outputs, which represent, I would say, roughly 20%, depending on the feedstock and so on. And you have material outputs also. And from this material output, you can have some of ethylene, propylene, but also other outputs. And then the question was first, how much can we allocate from this circular feedstock to be considered as recycled? And if you look at certification now, for instance, ISCC Plus or Red Cert 2, for instance, or there are others also, they were mainly using the free allocation. So meaning that if you put 1 ton of circular feedstock in the steam cracker, you only get rid of the losses, but otherwise you can allocate the overall. That means actually it's one. Yeah, my figures are not good because it was 0.98 tons of in the free allocation from the 1 ton of the circular feedstock. I hope you are following me. Then the option 2 is to take out the losses and the self-consumption. So there is only 0.8 ton to be allocated afterwards. So that's the option 2. The option 3 is the one that the European Commission will adopt, is the fuel exempt allocation. So you are getting rid of the self-consumption, of course, the losses, and also the energy output, and only focusing on the output that is a material. And you have a 0.6 ton that is ready to be allocated in the credit method. And there is an even more binding option that is a product-to-product yield. And you look at only what is, was plastic, recycled plastic as a feedstock in green. And you look is what is only plastic as an output. So it would be ethylene here. And what if you have longer carbon chain, that it won't be assessed and won't be accounted in the allocated that you are allowed to do. So, but what is important here is to notice that in Europe, we will be focusing on the fuel exempt allocation. That means that in this example, in this illustration, only 60% of the total circular feedstock that you put in will be accounted as recycled material. Okay? And that's following this methodology that we will count how many recycled plastic goes out from the steam cracker and chemical recycling, and what we are able to then how we can maybe support the use of such material today in our tomorrow in our fee. And as I told you before, you have more or less 400-500 euro per ton to support the incorporation of recycled material coming from mechanical recycling sources. Tomorrow, as soon as these specific decision will be taken by the European Commission, we will have much probably something like 1,000 euro per ton of prime for material that goes out from chemical recycling and that are respecting this fuel exempt allocation and that are eligible to our prime. So that's quite a big effort that the producers are doing to push for the use of such material and to give really the support to the industry to invest on new capacity because we have in 2030 we have a specific European regulation and we will have some specific objective for the incorporation of plastic, recycled plastic within plastic packaging, in every plastic packaging. So we need to have clear rules and we need to be prepared. And what the PRO are doing, especially CTO is doing in France, is really to prepare this transition for the binding constraint that will be there in 2030 for every plastic packaging, even the one containing food. I think I'm done, and I hope it was clear for you, my explanation, because it's quite a tricky topic. And I'm ready for any question.
Great, thank you, Gautier. I want to go back to Pete here. Pete, I know, are we not doing the other presentation at all? So should we now move into the next section, which is discussion and questions?
Yeah, unfortunately, there was Laura had a family emergency, and so she's happy to come again, but unfortunately, she couldn't come today.
Yeah, our sympathies are with her. So please share that with her, and gives us more time now for that discussion. So let's go to Brian, and I think that you might be interested in slide 13, although maybe this one also, please.
Yes, Brian Loma, Green Latinos. I want to start by thanking you for this excellent presentation. I absolutely appreciate. One thing that I note is that where my concerns are in this free allocation are maybe different than how they were presented. So I want to start. Can we go actually to the previous slide where we're at the very end?
Okay. Next one, 2 down. Yep,
there we go. That one. Now, I really like what I see in option 4 because it says product to product yield. And it seems to me that this requires that the chemicals that are made, the materials made in a cracking situation like this, we might call it pyrolysis, an incineration methodology here in the United States. That product option 4 has a tracking that guarantees that the materials made in this process are then utilized to make new plastic. Where my concern lies in option 3 is to understand what safeguards are in place to ensure that the chemical components from the plastic are tracked to new plastics and are not allowed to be utilized in the production of fuel.
Thank you for this excellent question. Actually, that's the debate we have in Europe also. The option 4 is something which is, as you said, really trackable and really fully transparent. We're sure that what comes out is the plastic that came in, more or less. And there is a chemical link between the feedstock that you put in your steam cracker or in the pyrolysis system and the recycled material that you get at the end. But it's kind of not reflecting what are the other products that can be produced out of your recycled plastic. Because of course, if you focus on the ethylene or the propylene, but you can have also other high-value chemicals that comes out of the steam cracker and that you can maybe use to build a new material that will not be maybe ethylene or propylene, but that will still be recycling as the definition of recycling that comes a material and not energy recovery. So the option 4 might be too restrictive, and therefore, and also there is a question, and to be fully transparent, of the how these options will make such investment for the industry. Will it be I mean, durable and long-term sustainable for industry or not to invest in new capacity if you can have only 35% of the feedstock that you put in that becomes a material that you can sell as a specific prices. So therefore, for them, that was quite difficult to accept this option 4, and there was many NGO pushing for this option 4 exactly for the argument that you put on the table. But now within this option 3, I didn't dip into too much details, but there is still a debate ongoing, and if you are interested in, I can send you a specific report from a Belgium university that is working on what we call a dual use concept, and that gives some specific weighting to different chemicals that goes out from the pyrolysis system, and to assess if they are if we can be sure or we can prove that they will become a matter, or if they have much more chance to become energy. And that's something, that's the option 3 with a specific system afterwards. And that's something our European Commission is working on. Because as you exactly told, the fuel exempt itself is not enough. It has to be completed.
Thank you very much. Brian Loma, Green Latinos. Can you said one thing that I would like to expand upon just very briefly, and that is that there are other materials other than new plastics. Can you tell us what those other materials are?
The main output out of a stream cracker that are interesting to become like an intermediate chemical that will become then plastic are C2 and C3, so ethylene and propylene, and then that will be polymers then to become plastic. But you can have some other chemicals, high-value chemicals, that goes out from the steam cracker, and that could be like hydrogen. Of course, hydrogen, you can do energy with it, but you also have some route to make a new plastic out of it. And there are some ways to do a new plastic out of it. So I'm not a full chemical expert, but there is not only C2 and C3 to make new plastic. You can have also other possibility until C4, C5, C6 to make also new plastic, maybe not polyethylene or polypropylene, but that can be aromatics, that could be PMMA, that could be other plastic that can be synthesized with the other high-value chemicals from the steam cracker. Is it answering your question?
I think so. I believe that what you're describing to us is a low proportionate output of the product from the original to the new product that can be incorporated into a new plastic by percentage. Where with mechanical recycling options, there's really a higher incentivization to make new plastic from old plastic versus the investments that go through with this process. But I really feel that a lot of what you've described, including the hydrogen, that at every fork in that potential other item, we have a potential for fuel usages that are hard to track. And that unless there's a product yield, that this option of mass balance seems to be disincentivized in Colorado, at least, where our regulation says that it cannot be utilized for fuel. So, this answers a lot of my questions.
Thank you so much, Brian. Rick, I want to just try to put a point on that question and see here before I go to you, which is, Brian's been, I think your question, Brian, is through the fuel exempt method here, when you have 60% coming into the ethylene output and other output, is there a way to guarantee that what goes in with the ethylene, with the others output, excuse me, does not go to fuel? Is there a way to guarantee that in the transparency?
The only way to guarantee that is to track the material from the beginning to the end. And that would mean really highly technical audit that are run directly at the petrochemical sites, and to know and to open the books and to know exactly to whom they sell the product and for what purposes. And so there is a balance to find between having such complexity of auditing and certifying and maybe having some positive lists of high value chemicals coming out from a steam cracker where you can tell there is a 90% chance that will become material. Of course, there is a chance that will become energy, but again, that's a balance to find between this really highly technical and quite long to run audit and really tracking every output and to know exactly where it ends up, or have something which is quite generic. But these balance also have to allow new technology and specific, I would say, virtuous technology to be better and to shine better that reference technology, I would say. So there is something to find, and that's quite tricky.
Thank you very much. Rick.
Rick Cater, Swordfish Consulting. Hey, thank you very, very much for presenting to us. This is awesome. I wanted to just ask a quick question on the others output, the 25% of feedstock. Can you give us an idea of what percent of that 25% you believe goes into end-of-life products that are no longer recyclable at that point, like the hydrogen piece?
To be honest, I don't know, and it would depend on the conventional feedstock, how much naphtha there is. The output can vary quite a lot. Again, the idea is to say that in this example, and again, that are only illustrative values. In this example, you have some ethylene or propylene where you be quite sure that it will end up in plastic or new material, and your other output when there is a doubt. And from this output, should we take all into account and say there is a massive chance that it will become a new material, or should we all discard them because we don't know and there is a chance that maybe that will become energy, so we should put them out. So it's just we try to track down every output, and we try to do something which is reliable and transparent, because there is a really need of transparency on this highly debated chain of custody in Europe. But again, that's I couldn't answer your question quite precisely, because there is many different outputs coming out from a steam cracker, and many different chemicals. And out of them, if you listen to LyondellBasell, if you listen to other chemicals, they will tell you that they are able to do material out of everything, even a chemical that is 99% use out of energy. They will say, I would be able to do a material out of it.
Sure, understood. You know, Brian, my thoughts here is option 4 leaves that 25% out in this gray place where they can do anything they want and you don't have any visibility there. And at least in option 3, you can see what's going on in that 25% bucket and have some controls in play. So I'm worried if you go to this option 4, you have no visibility of what's happening in that 25% bucket while you're crediting this 35% as a good thing. Does that make sense, Brian?
Brian Loma, Green Latinos. I actually challenge that thought in this manner. The research that I've done very specifically for the facilities that are doing this chemical recycling in the United States is the number one thing that I'm seeing missing here is the hazardous waste that has to be destroyed because of the chemical components of the plastic solids that become a toxic hazardous material when they go through this cracking or pyrolysis process. And it's my gut check initially that the outputs of the 25% of the feedstock would be equivalent to the hazardous waste that the Agilix facility in Washington had to have destroyed based on the amount of inputs that they were receiving and what was going out. So I just note from my own research that the number one thing I don't see on here is a hazardous waste material that has to be destroyed appropriately. And so for me, that would probably fall in the others process. And I don't necessarily see options 2, 3, and 4 as 100% aligning with the graph above it, because really the product to product yield would be the 35% of the ethylene, yes, but with options 3, again, we're still not accounting for the hazardous waste materials that would have to be destroyed in a fuel exempt model, which could not be counted toward the plastic plastic to plastic.
Would that be part of an amendment request from your perspective, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. My reality is that what I'm hearing from our colleague here in France is that free allocation mass balance is highly contested in Europe, and that it's under the middle of a strict discussion through the EU. And so the fact that the state of Colorado is having the same discussion with the concept of potentially creating harmonization across the United States with our extended producer responsibility regulations says that we're asking the right questions. And for me, what has been presented today is that there are no checks and balances to ensure under the free allocation process that there is no fuel, plastic to fuel tracking. It doesn't exist. And therefore, I think that my amendment request to eliminate free allocation mass balance as an allowed process for the state of Colorado not only establishes a baseline for meeting our statutory requirements, but provides CAA a guideline in looking at other harmonizations across the country.
Are there other advisory board members that would like to say a couple of words here? Liz.
Liz Chapman, Recycle Colorado. Thank you so much. And I apologize in advance for mispronouncing your name. Gautier?
That's fine.
Gautier?
That's perfect. Yeah.
Thank you for taking time to go through a very complex system with us and increase our understanding. I have a couple of questions for to clarify. So in your example, you have a 99 conventional feedstock to 99 parts conventional to 1 part circular.
Yeah.
And I am curious, is that a technological limit on the process? Is it possible with the technology that exists, that could be a 95-5? Could it be a 90-10? Or is there a limitation that it needs to stay? It will always be 99-1.
No, it's not always 99-1. It's only illustrative. But for sure, depending on the quality of the oil going out from the pyrolysis process, and so depending on the quality of the waste that you put in your pyrolysis process, then you won't be able to put too much circular feedstock within your steam cracker. So they're highly dependent on the quality of the circular feedstock you put in. So if you are, or maybe if you can fraction before the steam cracker, if you can fraction your pyrolysis oil and eliminate maybe the heavy fraction, maybe you can have some much more circular share in the feedstock. So it's really highly depending on the quality, but the common figures that we have from the industry is much more from 1 to 5% of circular feedstock, and from 99 to 95% of conventional feedstock. But
Thank you.
they always claim that they can do better.
Okay. So there is not a technological limit to it being 99-1.
The quality limit, I would say.
It is a quality limit, and that is dependent on the system getting better at producing higher quality feedstocks.
Exactly.
Then another question is, you had said that in the discussions with the producers in Europe, the option 4 with the 35% being considered recycled content was insufficient for producers. You said, you made a comment that was not enough. Could you elaborate on that perspective, what they mean by it's not enough?
I would say more guess than something which is widely known and official. But from my understanding, if you want to have such new technology that are put in place, and if you want to incorporate or has as a feedstock some recycled material, you need to invest. You need to have maybe some shift and some changes within your technology. So we need to have investment, and for them to invest, they need to have some I would say guarantee of selling material with a premium and enough material coming out of this circular feedstock that they put in. So if you have only 35% of the recycled material that you put in, you will have some difficulty to find the good, I would say, economic equation. And furthermore, we need to understand also this concept. If you look at the recycling performance at the downstream level, so you will use exactly the same calculation to assess the performance and the recycling rate at the end of life. So if you send polyolefin waste to such technology, you will be able to count only 35% as recycled if you follow this option 4. So that makes also something difficult for these technology to sustain as a technology for packaging waste, especially looking at the performance that we have to reach collectively regarding recycling performance.
Thank you. And then my last question is based on what you have said and this diagram. Regardless of whether or not the product yield is option 3 or option 4, in this scenario, the facility that is selling their output, if they are selling their output to a packaging manufacturer, that would be recorded as going product to product.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
if they are selling, if we look at that 25% and say they sell 10% of that to a packager, that would then count as product to product. And then they might sell 15% to fuel. But that would not be counted in this accounting system. That would not be considered recycled content, because out of that others, it got sold not to remanufacturing. So regardless of how this diagram looks like, there's also the element of where does that feedstock go? And only when that feedstock goes to a packaging facility is it accounted for as being recycled. Is that accurate?
I understood you correct. I think you are talking about the option 3, but tracking down what is called other output to make sure that it goes to material recovery and not energy recovery. So it's the way you can track down the material and make sure by auditing the industrial site and make sure that what is selling, this 25% output, is selling to packaging manufacturer or other plastic manufacturer, but who is manufacturing things and not using these output for energy. And that's the rules that needs to be filled, that needs to be described on the option 3. How to assess the option 3 to be sure that the other output are really material recovery and not energy recovery.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that additional explanation.
Thank you, Liz, Brian, and then Caroline. And we're gonna move into our, trying to get closer to being able to see where you're at with amendments and so forth on this. So Brian, Caroline, and Gail.
Brian Loma, Green Latinos. As you were describing this feedstock quality, I want to pose this question. If I have a PET content that is blended virgin plastic plus, say, 40% post-consumer mechanical recycling to mechanical production, and then I take this feedstock and I put it into a cracker system, the quality of that plastic will be diminished and the outputs will also be diminished because of the quality of the input. Is that what I understood you to say earlier?
No, that's much more regarding the quality, what is in the bale. If you have some quality standards when you run a pyrolysis, and you need at least 90–95% polyolefin within the plastic bale that you put in. That's what I call quality. They want to avoid having any polyamide, for instance. They want to avoid having polyester. They just need polyolefin. And if you put the right standard within the pyrolysis process, then the pyrolysis oil that goes out will be quite good quality. That's the quality I'm talking about.
Okay, I think I understand, and I appreciate that very clear standard that the primary material desired
exactly
is PET, a material that can also be mechanically recycled into new plastics with little losses, where this mass balance method introduces significant losses in the actual plastics.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Caroline?
Caroline Mitchell, City of Fort Collins. Also really appreciate this conversation. I wonder if we can go back one slide. So I know we've been getting into many, many details, and I'd like to kind of take us one level higher and sort of make sure I'm understanding some of our baseline elements here. So within this slide, the rolling average feels like it makes sense to me. And the credit, I guess if I'm understanding correctly, we've got the two examples here, the rolling average percentage and the credit. And then the next slide is a further refinement of the options within the credit category. Maybe I'll stop and pause to make sure that's correct. Okay. Well, I know that in the big picture, transparency around all of this work has been, you know, it's really important. And there are many things that have happened, particularly in the plastics world, to undermine trust in plastics recycling. And I'm wondering if the conversation, I feel like we're having a conversation about which, and I don't actually even really know if this is our choice, but which of the elements within credit we would support. And I'm wondering if the conversation, if it also makes sense to have a conversation about, does it make sense to allow for the credit methodology in the first place, regardless of which version within that we're discussing? So I think from my understanding, the credit methodology as a whole feels very non-transparent. And I feel like we've got a lot of different options on the table, and we've got physical recycling, we've got the rolling average, we've got many things in here. And so I feel like, and I was also struck by the comment that, or not struck by, but it makes sense, your comment that if we're in a world where we're saying credit methodology is an option within PCR content in Colorado, then if we choose option 4, that 35% yield isn't enough for facilities to invest in the technology, which I feel like is its own statement of like, if the outputs that are trackable aren't worth investing in, then I don't know that our goal of our EPR program is to incentivize development of these facilities, which feels like sort of the counter incentivizing there of like, if the world is assuming we need these facilities, then how do we get to measurements that support them existing? But it feels like a different conversation to me than what makes sense from a municipality perspective, a recycler perspective, a public trust perspective. I feel like the conversation should be, does it make sense to include credit as an acceptable methodology for PCR in Colorado's EPR program? My perspective, given this incredible amount of detail, is no. I think we just shouldn't include credit in the list of options. The rest of these, if there are technologies that make sense with these measurable processes, if then facilities make sense for industry to invest in them, great. So that's, given all of the conversation here so far, that's where I'm standing.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. Let me, Gail, if you don't mind, I'm gonna go to Wolf first. Give him priority here. I think he's gonna help us to refocus on what we're trying to do here. Go ahead, Wolf.
Yeah, I think that you're in the right place, Scott. So Wolf Cray, CDPHE, Gautier, thank you so much. Truly appreciate this. This is super insightful. It's fascinating to see the breakdown and the percentages based upon these various types of operations. It's greatly appreciated because it's something that we get asked about a lot, and it's nice to see those numbers. I do want to make sure that we're getting back to our root question here, right? How to measure post-consumer recycled content rates. That is the question at hand. I feel like we're jumping into policy a bit more, right? And we're not doing policy, we're focused on measurement. So as our expert here and with CTO's experience, I'm curious if there's just anything else you would like to share as far as what lessons learned on measurement techniques, in addition to everything else that you've shared with us.
Yeah, if I'm with my experience, first of all, focusing on post-consumer, it makes things and works much easier, especially defining the border between pre-consumer and what is not, which is industrial waste or industrial co-product. and that's this border. This is really difficult to draw sometime. So focusing on post-consumer makes the work really easier, and not following ISO 14021, which make the addition of pre-consumer and post-consumer. So, and the more we're going with the regulation in Europe, the more we focusing on post-consumer. So that is my first advice, I would say. And then really imply for the calculation, you really need to imply the whole value chain, because just look at one example. If I'm having a flexible to make a thermoform tray, for instance, so the flexible will be out of, I don't know, 40% post-consumer, but then you have some waste that comes from the thermoforming, and then you put it back into your product. How do you assess it? How do you count into the recycled content of the final product? So that's these kind of questions that we have every day. And we work with certification body, we work with the whole value chain for us to understand better how are the process, and then to be able to count in a proper way. But again, we really rely on standardization and the discussion and the debate within the whole value chain. And at the end, we will have some regulatory document that will give us the rules to have the recycled content calculation. And really, again, focusing on post-consumer makes the work easier.
Thank you, Wolf, for your focus here. And I put in the chat the statutory language so that you can see it here. And we're going to, after Gail's question or comment, we're going to now move to Caroline. We're going to move to, I got to bring it in here for a landing, which is, does it meet, does it not, is requirement met, requirement not met, or partially met? Right now, we've got it at partially met, which means that there's an amendment request, which Brian has listed here. I want you all to look in there and see if you, based upon the Gaudier's presentation, whether or not you have some changes, some language. Let's get specific. We've got to bring this in, and then there will be a straw vote here. And, I was shooting for 12:30. 12:45 is the outside limit for us here with this topic. Gail, and then Caroline.
Thank you, Gail, Gary, Steamboat Springs City Council. I guess maybe two questions and a comment. One, I appreciate, Caroline, your comments in terms of kind of raising this up to a kind of a broader level in terms of how we look at this, and just echo the comments about the success of the system. One of the foundations will be transparency and accountability. So kind of two questions to that point. And again, really appreciate the presentation. Thank you so much. Lots to learn in terms of and benefit from all of your learnings to date. So one question is, you did speak to independent or you spoke to third-party verification. Can you describe, is that what you would call independent third-party verification, or who does that verification?
There are some certification that they're rating the referential of the I would say all the different things to audit and to check and to verify. And then there are third party, which are like Veritas. I don't know if you know them. That they're really focusing on having such an audit. So they're really following all the different point to check within the certification document, and they are independent from the certification company and independent from the site that will be audited, and they're paid to spend maybe 1 or 2 days on the specific site and to look at the books and to look how many materials they bought, how many they sell, and they're doing the mass balance, they're doing a verification of the different weighting, or especially for steam cracking, they will check to whom they're selling, what kind of feedstock they're getting, and so on and so on. So it's really person which are independent from the certification itself and from the site that is audited also.
Okay, thank you. And then Scott, I had a process question. Will we be able to hear from the public, I can't just remember, public commenters before we take our straw vote?
Wolf, let me direct that question over to you, please. Usually do it after afterwards, but that is a good suggestion, I think, or something to consider.
Sure, I think that's fine. I'm also wondering if it's appropriate to do a straw poll when we don't have a quorum. We have a pretty small sample size here of board members at the moment.
Well, we could.
I mean, we can, but
just take it. So it's we could just consider it what it is.
I want to make a point. We actually planned, maybe I'm wrong. Didn't we plan to do public comment on the presentations and then move to the vote for the board?
Malik Gorton, CDPHE. Yes, that's correct, Amanda.
Okay. Great, thank you. All right, and then we have to work in a break here for people that may need one.
May I suggest we do public comment and then do a break and then come back to do the straw poll or further discussion on this element?
Okay. Caroline and Brian, is that good with you at this point? We can take a I think what was the suggestion, Amanda? Take a break, then do the public comment, and then, or hear the public comment now.
Public comment, then break, then vote.
I'm assuming it is late in France right now, so I just want to make sure that Gautier, if it's the time that I think it is in France, I would probably be asleep by that point. So.
No,
Yes.
that's fine, but I don't know how long does it last still, but I'm here to answer your question still, but yeah. I'm waiting to find my girls.
Brian Loma,
Okay.
Green Latinos, I do have one question left.
Okay, Brian.
Yeah, of course.
Expert. And what I'm curious about, I see mass balance. I'm sorry, under the mass balance, I see a rolling average percentage and a credit. Do you have something that's proportional credit versus free allocation credits? Do you have a difference in there? Or is it the rolling, or are there like rolling mass average and then just credits?
No, rolling average make the mass balance is two type of mass balancing, rolling average and credit, and within credit you have pre-allocation, but that's really beneath the method of the mass balance itself. Does it answer your question?
In the plan that we received, there's a proportional credit consideration as well. And my only just comment to the board and in this concern process is that proportional credit could have the same issues that free allocation does in the lack of tracking versus for the PCR content.
Okay. I'm going to move us along here, and and Liz, as the board chair, you'll have the last comment here, and I'm going to suggest we've been going for I believe it's close to 2 hours here.
Yeah.
See, yeah. So take a break, 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and do the public comment, and then we'll go into making decisions or getting to the point. And Wolf, if you want to check in with any of the legal staff here, we're just getting a straw poll, at that point in terms of where people are at, and that's where it will end up. So Liz, over to you.
Thank you, Liz Chapman, Recycle Colorado. Gautier, there was a question that Brian had asked, which is different than what I understood. So I wanted to clarify. When you all were discussing contamination and the quality of the feedstock. There was a statement made that these chemical and advanced recycling facilities require PETE feedstock. And it is my understanding that that is not true. They can take other types of plastic feedstocks, but what is important is that is all one. They can't take a mix of LDPE and PET. If they're going to take LDPE, it has to be just LDPE. If they're going to take PET, it has to be just PET.
Yeah.
That is my understanding from my research into this, is that these advanced recyclers can take a variety of plastic types, but they have to have surety that the plastic type that comes from post-consumer is all the same.
Yeah, I have exactly the same understanding as yours,
Okay.
and fully agree with you. Therefore, and that we always say, eco-design is still needed, even if you go through advanced recycling or pyrolysis, because there are so many people telling that, yeah, these advanced technology will enable us to recycle every plastic packaging. No, it's not true. If you want to do it efficiently, you need to eco-design your packaging. And for exactly as you said, if you design a packaging out of LDPE, make sure it's mono LDPE. Because if you mix different plastic resin together, then the efficiency and the yield of the pyrolysis process will be lower. And the quality that goes into the steam cracker then will be also lower. And then the product share as an output will be lower also.
Thank you for that clarification. And to revisit something that you and Caroline were discussing, I think one of as I understand you sharing with us the debate in Europe about this particular issue, an element of that debate is not simply that the producers need a higher than 35% allocation to invest in the technology, but it is also, without utilizing these other technologies, they are not incentivized to use recycled content. Is that also part of the argument that the producers are making about why they want more flexibility in the ways they can claim utilizing recycled content?
There is different answer to your question. First, as I told you, we have some Biden constraint coming in 2030 for every plastic packaging, even for food contact packaging. And especially out of PE or PP, there are actually no mechanical recycling possibility to decontaminate the material and goes back into food contact material. So the only way for us to have such material which are eligible and would make how we can address this constraint for recycled content for PE or PP will be having these kind of technology. So we need to find also the good balance for them to operate and to find economical equation, I would say, and economic and financial benefit out of it. But I don't feel that's my place to really assess if 30% yield at the end is enough for them to invest. But that's my feeling. And what if I hear them during the debate in Europe, they always ask for more flexibility because otherwise they won't be able to invest. That's their argument. But again, I'm not a chemical. I'm not a representative of Total or other chemical company. And I prefer, maybe the best way for you is to ask them and to know exactly what's the good balance for them and how maybe some option make the investment impossible and maybe some option make the investment feasible.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Gautier. Brandon, I'm going to move to the next step, which I foreshadowed, which is a 5-minute break. And when we come back, we will hear from, I think there were 2, and maybe there'll be more public comments. We'll hear from folks 2 minutes each. So you want to put up again, if you can, request for those in the public to put their name in the chat again if they want to make a public comment. Please start us up. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Scott, can we say thanks? We'll say thank you to Gautier for
Yeah,
the
I
presentation.
have to leave. Thank you very
thank
much
you
for
so
inviting
much.
me. And I will go back to my girls. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
And
Gautier.
have a good meeting.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
right, folks, welcome back. Thank you, Pete. All right, Amanda, we got the team going here. Here we go. Liz is still munching on her power bar. I hope everyone's gotten their coffee, their tea, their water, their power bars, whatever's going to pump you up for down the stretch here. We do have a small group today, so I want to acknowledge that. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Brandon, for the public comment.
Thank you, Scott. So we do have 3 public commenters here. So we are accepting public comment or questions on the topic of free allocation for mass balance credit chain of custody methodology. I do want to remind folks that we are going to be calling on attendees in the order that we received your request, and we do have limited time, so we're going to allow for 2 minutes for each comment. And if you run over your 2-minute period, you will be muted if you run over time. And question and answer periods are going to be moderated based on the amount of people we have in the queue here. So again, about 2 minutes per person here. So with that, I'm going to start with Ryan Call. Ryan, please go ahead and unmute, say your affiliation, and provide your feedback.
Hello, this is Ryan Call, and I'm the campaigns coordinator with EcoCycle. Today, I'm commenting on behalf of EcoCycle in support of advancing reuse and refill systems and in opposition specifically to free allocation mass balance credit systems for recycled plastic content. On the subject of waste reduction, in our review of the plan proposal, we were pleased to read that Circular Action Alliance plans on aligning reuse and refill programs with other EPR states with more ambitious goals, such as Maine and Minnesota. Also, our friends at Upstream have submitted detailed recommendations to further strengthen the reuse and refill section of the plan proposal while still being in alignment with Colorado's law. EcoCycle fully supports Upstream's recommendations. We believe ambitious reuse and refill systems align with the intent of Colorado's EPR law because, while there are few specific directives laid out in the law on this topic, there are several mentions of advancing these types of systems. Concerning free allocation mass balance, we support the recommendation that Board Member Loma previously made to remove free allocation mass balance from the plan, as this practice does not align with the law. Free allocation mass balance would allow for backdoor systems where plastic is converted into fuel, converted into energy through chemical recycling processes, or is otherwise incinerated. As clearly laid out in Colorado's EPR law, recycling does not include energy recovery, energy generation by means of combustion, or use as fuel. Last fall, 22 organizations sent CDPHE and Circular Action Alliance a letter making the case to prevent free allocation mass balance credit systems from being part of Colorado's producer responsibility system. Allowing free allocation mass balance not only fails to align with the law, but will also increase the public's current mistrust in plastics recycling. Thank you all for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Our next commenter is Renee Sharp. Renee, if you could please unmute, say your affiliation, and provide your feedback.
Hi, this is Renee Sharp with NRDC. My comment is that it does not make sense to allow any kind of mass balance credit methodologies. They are highly non-transparent and they will undermine public trust in recycling. If the program is going to allow some kind of credit methodology, it has to follow Colorado law. And what is Colorado law? If you're taking plastic waste to call it recycled, you can't turn it into fuel. Therefore, you can't allow option 3 fuel exempt and be compliant with the law because the chemicals that are produced could be used to make fuel. That's quite clear from the presentation we've heard today. If you are going to allow mass balance credit schemes, you have to go with option 4, which is also called polymer only. And there was also some discussion about option 3, fuel exempt, but including additional tracking. And it's important to note that there are no certifications that exist that do that tracking in the US. There's no third-party validator that can do this in the US, and so therefore it's not really a viable option. I also want to note this is not just about free allocation mass balance, it's about all forms of credit allocation. They're all misleading, they're all non-transparent, and they also all can lead to fuel production if you are allowing them. That's because under proportional credit allocation, you could have some outputs that are plastic, some outputs that are chemicals. Those chemicals can then be used to turn into fuel. So this is not just about free allocation, it's about all forms of credit schemes. And I also want to note that this discussion should not be about helping companies make investments in quote unquote new technologies. It should be making sure that you actually end up with recycled plastic and not plastic to fuel and not other toxic outputs. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. And our final commenter for today is Peter Bierbaum. Peter, go ahead and unmute, say your affiliation, and provide your feedback.
Peter Bierbaum with One World Resource. I do not understand the need for adding complexity to tracking PCR content. I think of PCR content as the amount of recycled material compared to recycled plus virgin material. I learned a different way of doing mass balance at the Colorado School of Mines. If I put 1 ton of recycled plastic into my reactor and produce 35% ethylene from that, I have basically produced 0.35 tons of ethylene to be able to use towards recycled content. I think I should be able to track that if I'm the facility and make sure that actually goes to reproducing plastic. The only other question I had is reading through CAA's proposal, and I appreciate the proposal very much to allow these options to be discussed. I am not sure what methods they are proposing to allow, whether it would include option 1, 2, 3, 4, or something else entirely. Thanks for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Peter. And Scott, that was our last public commenter, so I'll throw it back to you here.
Great. Thank you very much, Brandon. Thank you for those who made public comment. We're now going back here. At this point, we have an hour or less than an hour left in this meeting. And I'm gonna, Wolf, I wanna also ask you how strict I should be on the time for the 3 other topics, which we have 15 minutes each, which means that we would have about 10 minutes here to finish up this topic.
Yeah, I mean, that is our goal, right? Like, we're supposed to be done with this review today and move it into our discussion on the final amendments and comments in our in-person meeting. So I would just ask the rest of the board members to be cognizant of that and try to be on point with your comments. So let's do what we can.
All right. Thank you. All right, Caroline.
Caroline Mitchell, City of Fort Collins. Thank you to everyone for so many different layers to this conversation. And I appreciate your note, Wolf, that my prior comment was getting more into the principle and the policy of things than the actual regulatory side of things. Obviously, they all matter, and we are not here to create the policy. I do feel like from the baseline element of the bill states plastics cannot be used as fuel. And so from that compliance perspective, and that the credit method appears, from my understanding, to have many different ways where that could potentially take place. My recommendation is to modify Brian's draft amendment request to say disallow the use of the mass balance credit method, which I think would then remove the if as far as I understand, there's the mass balance credit method, and then there are the proportional polymer only and free allocation are like subsets of that, if I'm understanding correctly. And so my recommendation for alignment with the fuels requirement would be to disallow the use of the credit method. And I see Amanda has her hand up.
I do, thank you. I just want to perhaps give Wolf an opportunity, or David perhaps, to clarify what Colorado law is, because my understanding was that Colorado law does not prohibit the processing of plastics into fuel. It simply does not allow for those plastics to fuel outputs to be count as recycling. And so they couldn't be counted in recycled content. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my understanding. Chemical recycling is not specifically prohibited. It's just that we can't count any fuel as a recycling credit. I mean, my understanding is technically there might even be some circumstances where fuel is a necessary outcome of the process. And that isn't prohibited, it's just it isn't counted as recycling. I'm not as familiar with all this as Becca, I will also say.
Okay. Thank you, David. Thank you, Amanda, for the question. We'll go to Liz and then Caroline. And again, we're focusing in on the yellow highlight here, or the law. We have to say, right now we're at requirement partially met. And if it's partially met, then what amendment would you like? Brian has an amendment here that he's put in. To disallow any use of free allocation mass balance in the CAA plan, as it is not a transparent or accurate representation of PCR content that is traceable. So to ensure prevention of fuel uses. So that's his. And then there's another additional comment below that you can take a look at, but we're focused on the amendment request first. Over to you, Liz, then Caroline and Brian.
Liz Chapman, Recycle Colorado. So this question is probably directed at Peter. When calculating PCR content, is it the amount of material that has gone into an advanced recycling facility that is used? Is it that 1 ton that's being used? Or is it the amount of output that's being sold to a manufacturer after that 1 ton was introduced into an advanced recycling system?
It's the latter.
It is the output.
Yeah.
So as I understand the plan, what the plan is saying, what Circular Action Alliance is proposing is that excluding the use of only material, physical material that is sold to a manufacturing facility as a feedstock to produce material will be counted in calculating PCR. So to me, I think that given that, I don't know that it is relevant to our task to determine this free allocation versus not, because at the end of the day, the only thing that is going to get counted as recycled content is physical material that gets reintroduced into the manufacturing process.
And so you would think that, are you saying that you think the requirement has been met?
So my interpretation, yes, it looks like the requirement has been met. My other comment is I am uncomfortable with this small group making the full decision. And I feel like regardless of where we land today, this needs to be revisited with the larger board in April.
Thank you. And it was brought to my attention here that most of the companies are not here on this call. Okay, thank you, Liz. Caroline.
Caroline Mitchell, City of Fort Collins, struggling to find my mouse. Liz, I hear you. I was actually going to say something else until you made your comment. I guess maybe your comment makes me feel a little bit more confused. I feel like it was very clear, but of my understanding of the situation. I feel like my understanding of the topic is that we have this table 26 on page 139 and 140 that says what methodologies, what verification framework CAA will use to recognize PCR. And it includes the mass balance credit method, and further down on page 140, the proportional and free allocation methods that I think we were hearing can include plastics use as fuel. And I also hear you saying that only PCR that is used into plastic will be counted, but I feel like those don't make sense to me together because I see them listed as as verification methodologies in this chart. And so maybe I'm misunderstanding, but could you help me clarify that?
Scott, Liz Chapman, Recycle Colorado. Can I respond?
Yeah, please. I was just going to jump in there, but go ahead.
Directly. So Caroline, as I see it, if we were to say in this plan that the chain of custody model that CAA is proposing to recognize, that would mean that a facility that accepted whatever amount of post-consumer recycled content and processed it in such a way that it was impossible to distinguish the individual particles of material, which is the advanced recycling conundrum, they would not be able to count any amount of that output as recycled content, despite the fact that a measurable amount got fed into the system. If all of these mechanisms are not recognized, then the output from that plant cannot be considered recycled content in any, whether none of it gets to count as recycled content. And as I understand it, what Circular Action Alliance is proposing is that by recognizing those chains of custody, there is a proportion of material that can be sold as recycled content if it meets these other criteria. But I see Wolf wants to jump in, so perhaps I have misunderstood something.
Not at all, Liz. I actually just kind of want to build off of what you're saying. I think one way we could kind of look at this as an analogy is similar to like a MRF, right? So when you have material going into a MRF, you have contamination and you have your recycled content and you have other things that don't get in a bale and sent to market. And for PCR, we're only counting what gets to market, right? Like it is that feedstock, that raw material. We're not counting the input in a MRF. We're counting what's going to the end user. And I think we're talking about the same thing here, is just making sure that whatever methodology CAA is going to use, we're only counting what's getting to market for PCR content.
Okay.
And Pete, I don't know if you can verify if I'm interpreting that correctly based upon the language that you have, but I think that's what we're trying to hone in on. Okay.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Wolf. Brian?
Brian Loma, Green Latinos. I think that there's a reason that I focused on free allocation versus proportional credit, even though maybe some of the people who are advising me suggested that both proportional and free allocation allowed for some of this fuel usages. But at the end of the day, what I've heard from our presentation today is that under the free allocation methodology, only a product confirmed would allow for the direct tracking, and the fuel exempt does not allow for a product redevelopment tracking. In the fuel exempt methodology, the credit is assigned at the chemical creation level and not at the production of a new plastic. And that doesn't and there's all kinds of stems off of that process. So I was supporting Caroline's amendment about the free allocation versus on the slide that she indicated, and I originally had indicated to like focus on, but I stuck to the second slide that they presented there in that setting because it showed the difference between fuel exempt and direct to the next new plastic setting. And as CAA's plan does not outline the specifics of tracking to the creation of new plastics, but lists a fuel exempt as the standard, that does not statutorily meet the requirement to ensure that it is never turned into fuel, or that the fuel processes are excluded, because it is not ensuring that the chemical made out of the process is applied to a new plastic. And my understanding of the statute is that if we go down a AR route, that the content of PCR content has to be in the use of a new plastic. And based on the ISO standards, that assignment of PCR credit is made at the chemical level, and especially under the fuel allocation or the fuel exempt methodology, does not assign it to the new production of materials.
Thank you, Brian. David, please.
And I'm not sure if you meant it exactly this way, Brian, but what I heard you say was that we needed to prohibit the manufacture of fuel from plastics, and that is not the statutory mandate. The statutory mandate is just that we don't count that fuel towards the recycled content. So there's an internal disincentive to create fuel, but creating fuel is not prohibited by the statute.
I understand, and Brian Loma, Green Latinos, David, thank you for that clarification of my words. I concur that the statute does not prohibit a company from taking Colorado plastics and making fuel out of them, but that the PCR content is what we're judging here in the system. And so where free allocation is established, it's not about preventing the creation of fuel. It's about ensuring that through the pyrolysis, chemical recycling, incineration, whatever you want to call it, systems, that where chemicals are made, in order to be credited as post-consumer content, those chemicals must be made into a new plastic. And that the free allocation tracking methodologies does not ensure the must. It's a can. They can be used in a new plastic, or they can be used in a fuel. In order for EPR to fund that chemical component produced out of cracking a solid plastic, the chemical must be used in new plastics. According to the tracking systems that exist that have been defined to us, that doesn't exist unless you ensure that the chemical is made into a new plastic, which the free allocation methodology as a whole, going back to Caroline's slide, not mine, does not ensure that it's made into a new plastic. And that's why I feel it's out of compliance.
Okay. Caroline, and then I'm going to go to Liz here. I think we're gonna well, let me just go to Caroline. The thought here from behind the screen is that we can and should continue this conversation at our in-person meeting, and that we'll find time for that. And we can come back to move on to 705 4UV to at least get a couple of other things done before the end of the day. It's a lot to bite off here and a lot to consider. And we have fewer individuals on the advisory board here at this point. So Liz, as the chair of the board and the spokesperson for this group, I will come back to you. Okay, Caroline?
Caroline Mitchell, City of Fort Collins. I think part of where I am getting confused in this, and I understand that we need to move on and we'll come back to this, but I think there are two different elements here. There's the definition of what is recycling, and that recycling doesn't include the use of fuel, and recycled content, which is different than the definition of recycling. And I don't know where in our, if there is a place within our feedback here that, you know, that sort of the what is recycling question is referenced, that's, I think a lot of our comments would connect with. So I feel like it's very related to all of this, but it's not actually the heart of what we're talking about here, but it's part of what I'm getting my brain all wrapped around in.
Right.
So
yeah, I think it's, if I could just jump in, it seems to be what can be verified as not going to fuel. That seems to be the key question, verified. That's where Brian is coming back to, pointing us in that direction. And that's the question. And I don't know, you know, that's where we can pick that up. But that is the question, verifying. If you have a mix of things, then as Liz said, the mix of things, if it can't be verified, then that can't be counted towards recycling. But at what point in this process can the material be verified that it's going to into a recycled product? And that's the question. I don't know, Pete, if you want to jump in quickly on that in terms of it, but that could be what we discuss next time, is the verification, and at what point are we at in the process? I'm hearing us kind of go all around that thing, and that's the point. And I'm not sure is the technology there? What is it from Europe? Where are we at? So that's what I'm going to suggest at this point. And Brian, Clinton, and Gail, anything that, Caroline, sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Caroline,
but I feel like I'm not succeeding here, moving the group along, and I feel badly about that. So, but this is your meeting. Go ahead.
Caroline Mitchell, City of Fort Collins. Just the second half of the thought that I wanted to share is, I hear, again, going back to the slide of what the mass balance credit methodology shows, where there's a certain amount of material that comes in and different products receive a different amount of that credit. I feel like that does not align with everything that we're talking about here as a system. If we get, there's 30% that goes in, and bottles that are coming into Colorado get 100% of the credit. I feel like, aside from all of these things we're talking about with fuel, I feel like that does not meet the criteria that we're talking about of traceable plastic coming in. So I know we need to move on. I'll leave it there, but I just wanted to come back to the bottom.
Thank you. Brian.
I'd like to get a straw poll, even though we're moving on.
Chair Liz, what do you think?
I would like to hear from Clinton and Gail before we move into that phrase.
Okay, thank you. Clinton?
Yeah, first, I'll keep this quick, I promise, Scott. I do feel like we're talking about the definition of recycling and getting clarity on that, similar to what Caroline is just talking about. And then I'm thinking about what we're talking specifically here. And does it align or does it not align? I've had the same challenges with certified compostables. Do they fit underneath the definition of recycling or not? And within the whole program plan. So, and the other thing that I'm thinking, guys, right now, if we can do the best we can on this call to dial in this draft amendment before this next meeting, I think that would be really beneficial because of the amount of information we have been presented right now versus trying to reintroduce all that education on the next call with a bunch of people that weren't here. So if we can dial this in something solid as close as possible, I think that would be the best use of our time versus just moving along real quick and having to kind of build back up again. That's my suggestion.
Thank you, Clinton. Gail?
Gail Gary, Steamboat Springs City Council. You know, again, looking at this from the lens of the success of the program and from the lens of kind of transparency and accountability, you know, I still have a lot of heartburn, right, in terms of kind of the free allocation based upon kind of the, you know, the conversations that we have had. And I think it also, you play into it, and I put it in the chat, you layer in third-party verification. And what I heard, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I heard in terms of in France, it is an independent third-party verification. And so, you know, I think there's a significant distinction there in terms of third-party independent verification versus, you know, a verification. So, as I say, I'm supportive of, you know, I think of the amendment. I do have concerns with kind of the free allocation and while I understand and appreciate, you know, the conversations that we've had and I guess when we just look at page 139 and 140 of that CAA, there's just still confusion in my mind. So
thank you, Gail. All right, Liz, over to you. And Clinton's, I'm hearing him suggest that we continue this discussion for the last half hour and not switch topics. That's what I thought I heard you say, but that's an option that he's suggested. So I will put it over to you as to how you'd like to move forward.
Liz Chapman, Recycle Colorado. I think that in order for us to fully land as a body on what we want the final request to be, we need the other representation of the board. For example, I know mass balance is a critical piece of glass recycling, paper recycling, and plastics recycling. And we have none of those representatives on this call today. Therefore, I am very uncomfortable with us deciding definitively that we want to make an amendment request and what the language of that amendment request would be without input from the representatives of those industries that know more about the use of this accounting than those of us present, despite the fact that we have become very educated with all of the information. So I would be fine with drafting an amendment that we want to take up at the April session, so that, as Clinton says, we're making some movement forward. We're not starting from ground zero, but we are making it clear to our fellow board members that we have not decided on that. We're holding off on a final decision on that amendment until they have the opportunity to weigh in on the discussion. And I see, Clinton took his hand down. Oh, no, he's back up. He's back up. Clinton, and then Brian.
Okay. All right, sorry, Brian, I jumped right back in there on, yeah. I just, Wolf, I don't know if this is for Wolf or if this is for our attorney on, that I can't see right now, so I can't.
David.
David, thank you. But within this, and Brian, maybe you can throw some clarity here. Within this conversation and within determining that we're in line with the statute, we have one side that's saying, are we adequately measuring PCR to verify that it's going to an end market that is not fuel? And then on the other side, we have that it doesn't matter if it's going to be used as fuel because that's not against Colorado statute, that because it doesn't, it's just that we're tracking, it's a tracking mechanism under PCR. It's not a determination if it's a effective recycling process. But is that the conundrum? Because under the definition of recycling, this is not allowed. So I'm trying to really understand, did we ever review the definition of recycling in the act? And then did we miss that?
No.
So
Okay, I'm just trying to get clarity so that when we're trying to draft what we're trying to draft here, that we're answering what's at the top of this section.
Thank you,
Measure.
Clinton.
Okay,
Since
thank you.
Wolf, you popped in there, Brian, if you could allow Wolf to make a comment first, thank you.
I'm going to try to address that question, Clinton. And I think it goes back to what is not recycling. And I think that's very clear, right? Part of the issue I think we're running into is fuel and chemical recycling are two very different things, but both can occur under pyrolysis. So if you are putting a ton of plastic into a pyrolysis unit and 60% of what comes out of that is a monomer, polymer, something that can go back into making more plastic, that is PCR content. That other 40% that's getting used as fuel to run that burn, to use as fuel in that unit or being sent something else for use as fuel, that is very strictly, clearly not recycling. So yes, the act on what is recycling goes beyond just mechanical recycling. Chemical recycling can include parts of it, but it cannot include any type of fuel. Does that help?
It does, but let me just, I'm just going to quickly counter and you can just tell me to be quiet if you want. But are you guys still there? Okay.
We're here.
But yeah, but what if I'm taking in certified compostables through my stream and then putting them into anaerobic digestion that makes renewable natural gas? Is that fuel? And is that under the definition of unacceptable recycling?
That
So-
would not count as recycling because it's being made into a fuel, unless we treated compost differently from other recycling.
Well, just a clarification.
I don't want to throw us. I don't want to throw us off onto a wild goose chase. So I'm just trying to understand where this is sitting, and so don't go into what I just brought up. But I'm just saying, just trying to see if we're trying to figure out the solution to this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
David Kreutzer, Colorado Attorney General's Office. Sorry, I've not been introducing myself. We have to remember that some of these policy calls have been made in the statute, and it is not up to the advisory board to change the policy. Talking about policy in these meetings prevents us from reaching conclusions which are relevant to the task of the advisory board, which is to determine whether or not the recommendations made by CAA meet the statute. If there is some part of the statute that you disagree with because it does or does not allow fuel, the statute allows fuel to be an outcome of a process. It just doesn't allow that fuel to be counted as recycling. So the statute does not incentivize fuel, but it does not prohibit it. And discussing whether that's a good or a bad thing only prevents the advisory board from reaching its relevant, the things that it can talk about, conclusions.
Thank you, David. Wolf. And then Peter, I'll go to you next.
Nope, nothing for me. My hand should be lower.
Okay.
Sorry, I was just going to make the point. Anaerobic digestion is different. Methane is a byproduct of the process. There still is a product that comes out, which is digestate, that's usually fed onto fields. So different technology.
Thank you. Brian?
Brian Loma, Green Latinos. I want to go back and address the question Liz asked or commented on, and I value having our other industries present to provide their input. I would say that mass balance rolling average is what is used for the other feedstocks because they still stay in their physical format as a solid, right? Paper is still made into pulp, into paper, aluminum and glass into aluminum and glass. So the real chemical incineration process is where it changes it from a solid to a gas, and all of this other variables come into play. That's my experience, and I don't know if anybody here has a different experience. I also wanted to challenge the idea that PE can't be utilized. I think that we're considering the film to land or to roadways process, which is an example of PE use as some form of this recycling issue. But
Brian, you're on mute.
sorry, it's not for me that the chemical process is not allowable. It's that it doesn't effectively track what ends up into new plastic to assign the PCR content, because only the complete following through that material into the new creation of plastics. And that's why I am calling free allocation, not statutory.
Okay, thank you, Brian. There were some hands that went up and went down. Okay. So, Liz, I think you were asking for this to be moved to the next meeting at this point. Did I hear correctly? You can just put a
Yeah,
thumbs up.
Liz Chapman, Recycle Colorado. I appreciate what Clinton had said earlier, that we don't want to start from zero when we meet with the larger group in April. And so the draft amendment request that I see in the document that says disallow use of free allocation mass balance, and there's also disallow mass balance credit method. Both of those things have been suggested as a possible draft amendment. And I would just ask that whatever language we land on to put in the draft amendment, we highlight to our fellow board members that we are waiting to have a larger discussion before we make a formal amendment request.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, if Amanda, thank you for bringing these up. If you could just have them in the same view, but under the same view I think you do right now, one from Brian and one from Caroline. Those are the two that we're looking at, and I think what Liz and maybe Clinton and some others are looking for is whether to modify any of this language now, or to
So, Brian, I see your comment here in the webinar
good comments
chat.
and hands at the same time from the same person. Go
So-
ahead. Brian, do you want to speak, or do you want to put Wes to read your comment?
Yeah, Brian Loma, Green Latinos. I would say that I would be amiable to amending my request to match Caroline's.
Okay, so they're the same. All right, very good. So take a look at that. And is there any further refinement that anyone would like to bring the best? I would suggest at this point not putting more comments in and drawing our attention over there. Just raise your hand and let's finish the meeting that way. Thank you. All right, Caroline?
Caroline Mitchell, City of Fort Collins. I would like to just make sure that of one point of clarification. Are free allocation and proportional subsets within the mass balance credit method, or are they used within the other chain of custody models?
They're subsets.
Subsets specifically of the credit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of
Okay. Thank you, Peter. So I'll take that parenthesis out of this. I continue to, and I know we have talked about this in so many different ways, but I continue to not understand how, if in the credit methodology where you can take a certain amount of things and apply all of the recycled content to specific products, I don't understand how that aligns with our requirements here. So
Okay.
that's the reasoning behind, and I'll just pause and come over to Liz.
Can I just add?
Please, Pete.
That's
Yep,
helpful.
you jumped in to
So
respond.
Carolyn, just keep in mind, I mean, I think maybe you are expecting a level of precision here on recycled content that is maybe not realistic, in the sense that companies are supplying material across and packaging across the country. So the recycled content is based on national supplied numbers, not on specific numbers supplied into specifically Colorado, because there's just no way to be able to fine tune the numbers to that degree given distribution lines. So I just keep that in mind as you're thinking. But essentially, if there's 100 tons of recycled content that's available and that consumers use, that producer can only, that's all they can account for, right? Like we're providing bulk numbers in Colorado as to the amount of material that's supplied and what the recycled content is associated with that. And so we're limiting the ability for any double counting, and this is done across the entire packaging that's supplied into the marketplace.
Thank you, Pete. Liz?
I would like Caroline to finish her thought in response to what Peter said.
Caroline Mitchell, City of Fort Collins. Is there any possibility we're able to pull up the slides again and go into that one that had the overarching mass balance, the rolling average versus the credit method?
Okay.
I feel like we're talking about lots of different things, and I feel like I want to make sure that I'm being clear about what I'm trying to communicate, and maybe I'm still missing something. But so I guess yes. Okay. Thank you very much, friends. Okay, so in this example, in the credit methodology, here, let me describe what feel like I'm taking from this, and maybe you can help me if I'm misunderstanding. So I hear you saying, Peter, that the recycled content is going to be nationwide. And I feel like the things that you're describing feel like the rolling average percentage. The way we're describing it, what's going to happen, feels like everything feels like the image we're seeing there on the left. The image on the right, part of what I am feeling like I would understand happening is, say, maybe in this example, there's 5% of the feedstock is recycled content. And I feel like if I'm understanding correctly, on the left, that all of that producers' products for the entire country would be considered 5% recycled content. On the right, perhaps the materials perhaps they can claim in Colorado, maybe 30%, 40%, maybe they're allocating all of that recycled content into the materials coming to Colorado. Sorry, maybe I pause there.
Let me use the example. So I think there's 8 tags there, and excuse me if I counted quickly, but there's 8 tags there. So think about that as 8 different products that are packaged that a producer sends into Colorado. The producer is going to report into the pro based on those 8 product lines, and let's say that equates to 100 tons of recycled content. In both the rolling average percentage and the credit system, they will report in 100 tons of materials for the packaging they supply into the marketplace. It doesn't matter. It's that's all they can report in for. So if one product has no material in it and one has 100% in it, it's still that only that will account for that 100 tons.
And do the products actually have the amount that they're claiming the credit for?
That's what the third-party verification is in place. So that's why we're requiring the verification of that post-consumer recycled content.
And I guess, okay, I still feel like I don't understand why the credit methodology is required then, if it's still just all, I feel like the rolling average accomplishes the same thing with more transparency.
Okay. Ryan, then Gail.
My question and clarifying, in the rolling average basis, there still has to be post-consumer content physically in that item. Because I know that there's another issue of free allocation where it's like, well, this is 100% and this is 0%, but we're going to say that this one's 30% because of all the products we make. But in the rolling average, there's some post-consumer content in the actual material. Is that not correct?
Pete?
I guess I'm getting to the sort of where it's like, we want to know how much post-consumer recycled content is being supplied into packaging for producers. I think your concern specifically, if I understand it, is about the labeling of a specific package. I think we're saying producers might be doing some of this already. We're just simply trying to utilize a system that might be in place already that they're using to be able to verify the content. But at the end of the day, if it's only 100 tons of material across their product lines, it's only 100 tons, and it doesn't matter whether you use rolling average or the credit system.
Okay. I'm seeing hands dart up and come down and darting up again, and there's Caroline.
Caroline Mitchell, City of Fort Collins. I really appreciate all of the conversation today, and I think I am sort of at a place of pause. I know we only have 9 minutes left anyhow, and we're going to be coming back to this in our in-person meeting. So I think I'm just going to pause here and give this more thought before our next meeting. So thank you all.
I don't think you'll be the only one giving this more thought before the next meeting. So if there are no other questions at this point, I'm going to then bring us into a landing at this point. And, I want to thank all of you for wrestling with this. I'm going to say, the basic thing I said many times, which is you're on the cutting edge. This is not easy. And it does take a lot of thinking and joint thinking and sometimes several times to understand it and communicate it and figure out what you want to do. So, you're doing great. And this was a really important discussion. It was good to have our friend from Citeo here, and we have more questions, and so Amanda and I will be working from now till the next meeting to try to clarify some of these things with Wolf and Melik and other Brandon and each of you, not together but separately here. And so we want your comments, we want your questions, so that we can come to the next meeting try to refine, like, what are those key questions that we have to answer? And what is the law? What is not the law? In other words, what's policy, and what's in bounds for you? You have to operate and be constrained. You're constrained by the law here. And the only way to change that is an amendment to the law. So we're here to go through the plan itself and see if CAA has met their legal requirements. And so it may be somewhat frustrating. And then again, you may have some breakthroughs for us all and move us towards that place, which really will make some significant changes in that plan. So I don't know where all of those will come out, but we have finished. We have a couple more topics. This one, work group 6, 7054R. And then we have also the 5, 6, and 7 of 705 4U. So we've got 4 more of these topics to go through. This is clearly the biggie. With that, I'm just going to thank the members of the public as well for being here. Those that gave your public comments, really, really important. Very helpful for all of us, and thank you for attending. And oh my goodness, we're going to end a little early today. So at 1:25 p.m. Mountain Time, have a great Gail. I was going to say goodbye, but what did I miss? What did I forget?
Oh, no, just point of clarification. Thank you. Sorry about that, Scott. I just looked at the slide and our in-person meeting starts at 10:30.
No, Wolf saying no.
No,
The
the
Yeah, that's what
in-person
I-
meeting
10:30.
starts at 9. That's a typo on the slide.
Okay, so yeah, so
9
let's
a.m.
clarify. It's
board
9 to
meeting.
4, right?
Correct.
Thank you.
9 to 4. Thank you, Gail, for that important clarification.
And nobody gets to leave the
Anything
room
else?
until we sort through all this, because we're we're up against a tight deadline here.
Yes. All right, folks, have a good evening, and we'll see you on April 2nd, at least those of you who can come. Thanks. Good job.
Thank you.